Sacred Heart. And in case you haven't heard, community leaders have been organizing since 2009 to win victories such as the housing impact and commercial linkage fees, just cause eviction protections, saving our community centers and meal programs for seniors, creating the city's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and the county's policy to not cooperate with ICE, protecting Calle Willow, and we continue to fight a new jail in the Care First jail's last campaign. In addition to myself, we have additional panelists that are representing our 5 action committees. Elizabeth from Sacred Heart Housing Action Committee, Deborah from Survivors of the Street, Cara from Pasos, working for immigrant rights, Kiana from Racial Equity and Community Safety, and Brian from Showing Up for Racial Justice. In addition, I'd like to thank all of our leadership team members at Sacred Heart, our organizers, our directors, everyone who's been working hard in the community to empower those of us at the ground level. So just some logistics for everyone. Myself, including other community leaders, will be asking questions tonight related to housing and homelessness, community safety, racial equity, and immigration. The Q&A feature is there. However, we will not be utilizing it from the audience. So the questions are there, candidates, but no need to answer. Our format is a series of questions on each topic with time to provide full answers and a few yes or no questions on each topic. The time to answer questions will change so we can get to as many questions as possible. At the end of each section is an opportunity to follow up or respond to something said by another candidate. Each candidate will get equal time. We'll also post the questions in the chat. Today, our timekeeper is Nora from Showing Up for Racial Justice, or SURJ for short, and they will show time using the Zoom window, blue sky timer. And we're going to begin. So we're going in alphabetical order by last name. So we will start with Cindy Chavez, opening statement, 60 seconds.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am delighted to be with all of you. Appreciate very much that you're taking time away from your families to have this very important discussion. I recognize that we're being translated, so I will just say to those translating, the interpreters, that if I speak too fast, just send me a note. One of the reasons that this evening is so important is that the topics that you're looking at covering are so critical to so many in our community. Whether it's racial equity or safety or immigrant rights or housing or homelessness, these are all issues that not only the next mayor will face, but all of us currently face and have records, I hope, that we'll also get a chance to speak about. I'm going to wrap up now, but mostly because I want to make sure that we have as much time as possible for your questions. Thank you.
Matt Mahan, 60 seconds.
Good evening. Thank you so much for hosting this forum. I really appreciate the work you all do in the community and the opportunity to talk about some of the issues that you all are focused on and we're focused on as a community. I grew up in a working class family over the hill in the little town, not so little anymore, town of Watsonville, and came to San Jose as a work-study scholarship student in high school, attending Bellarmine College Prep. When I came back after college, I was a public school teacher in Eastside San Jose out in the Alum Rock School District at Joseph George Middle School, and then was an entrepreneur here in the Valley, building tools to promote civic engagement. And I'm sure, like all of you, I want my children to grow up in a city that is diverse, that's safe, that's clean, that's affordable, that's thriving. And I look forward to talking to with you all this evening about some of the policies we can implement to ensure that that's true. Thank you again for having us.
Raul.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Raul Perales, and I'm a proud lifelong resident here in the city of San Jose, raised in a working class immigrant family, grew up in a rent control apartment over in West San Jose, and had the privilege of being the first in my family to be able to graduate from college right here at San Jose State University. Graduated with a degree in math, went on to be a substitute teacher here in Santa Clara County Alternative Ed. community day schools, the Boys Ranch and Juvenile Hall. Went on to be an EMT and then a police officer here in San Jose after that. And while I was an officer, I was the only active duty officer to ever also teach at Osborne School and Juvenile Hall. In 2014, I ran for the council, and I've now served our community here as a council member representing the downtown core. And I've been proud to work with Sacred Heart and be able to accomplish a lot of the things that you listed off at the beginning. And I look forward to discussing some of that tonight and seeing how we can continue to work on these very important issues together. And thank you.
Thank you. Our first questions tonight are about racial equity and community safety. For 2 years, we've been involved in a renewed effort to acknowledge the stark racial inequalities in law enforcement and the fight for policing reforms to make our communities safer. Part of this effort was the hard work of 2 community-led commissions, the Charter Review Commission and the Reimagining Public Safety Committee. These commissions were made up of people from all walks of life and all parts of our city, and they were united on key questions about police and community safety. As representatives from these committees shared at last night's city council meetings, they agree San Jose needs 2 things. 1, powerful and meaningful community oversight of police. 2, a radical rethinking of how police are deployed, including alternative responses to mental health crises, unhoused communities, gender-based violence, and more. With that in mind, we have a series of yes or no questions for you on some of the recommendations, and then we'll give you a chance to expand on your responses afterward. So the first question will go to Council Member Mahan, and we'll continue to rotate by alphabetical order. So yes or no, you'll have, let's see, I'm just double checking. Yes, a minute. Sorry. Do you support community service officers paired with the social workers to respond to calls involving unhoused residents and encampments?
Yes, and I'm sorry, did you say it's a minute or it's yes or no?
I'm sorry, it
Just-
actually is yes or no,
It's yes or
but
no.
I see the timer on.
Yeah, I'm yes.
Going in the same order, right? So yes.
Yes, but I would say with really good training.
Next question. Will you commit to supporting an alternative 911 system to respond to domestic violence? Raul Perales.
Yes.
I'm sorry, me? I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that. I would have to think more about it.
I would be a maybe. I would also need to learn more.
Next question. Do you support a program to provide a basic income to women and families impacted by the incarceration of a family member? Cindy Chavez.
I think I would, but I would need to learn more.
Same. I would need more information.
Yes.
Next question. Do you commit to supporting a non-police approach to traffic enforcement? Matt Mahan.
Depending on the infraction, yes.
Yes, a hybrid approach, actually, as was presented in the report.
Yes, hybrid approach.
Do you commit to funding a crisis response team to respond to mental health calls? Raul Perales.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, I'm not sure what order we got out of it.
No,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So now you'll have an opportunity to offer a fuller response of all the ideas to change policing that have come from the Reimagining Public Safety Committee and the Charter Review Commissions. Which do you think are best? You'll have 60 seconds. We're going to start with Cindy Chavez.
Thank you. I think that matching the right call with the right response is probably the most promising idea that I think's come out. And a couple of things I would say is that one, we have the MCAT team now that we have responding to calls for service with both officers and mental health workers. We have Trust that will start this summer. That is a nonprofit response to mental health calls. And I think that, long term, what I'm hopeful of is that as we really help expand the folks who are working in dispatch, that being able to communicate, for example, using your phone and FaceTime, so you can give the dispatcher enough information that they can support getting the right response to the right kind of call is really what I'd like to see in the future of policing.
I think I'm next. Are you all ready? Okay, I still see Supervisor Chavez there, but I'll go ahead and answer. I agree. I mean, I think that differentiating our response depending on what the caller needs makes a lot of sense. In fact, we do that for 311, which is obviously generally not public safety related, but I think building on that concept, we've seen success with our MCAT unit. I think it makes a ton of sense to partner with other agencies that have resources and specializations that we do not have as a city, and ensuring that we're appropriately responding. I also think piloting things makes sense. We often get stuck in government and thinking that we have to lock something in for the next 10 or 20 years. And I think we need to be more flexible. So the way that we've slowly built out MCAT in the last couple of years and seen how effective it is a great model for that. And I think we should build on that success.
Thank you. 5 days after George Floyd was murdered, I authored the memo that actually initiated this process at the council and first recommended the language around reimagining policing in the city of San Jose. And ultimately we retitled that to Reimagining Public Safety. But I built off of my personal experience working 8 years as a full-time police officer here in the city of San Jose, being a lifetime resident, and then now a council member and still currently reserve officer. We depend far too much on our police officers. We use 911 as a safety net for all of our social challenges and many things that officers are not the best trained professionals to be able to respond to. And I think that was one of the best things to come out of this effort, was a recognition of that. And the response now is going to be that we need to have the right professionals to respond to these types of calls for service. Beyond what we mentioned in yes or no, I would say the training aspect is also extremely important in ensuring that we bring in professionals from outside the police department.
Thank you all. Next question. The Reimagining Public Safety Committee and Charter Review Commissions have recommended creating an independent office of investigation to fully investigate cases of police misconduct and police shootings. They also recommend a civilian oversight body with power to review and advise on police practices and investigate misconduct claims. Do you support these recommendations? What kind of external oversight of police do you want to see? 60 seconds for each candidate. We'll start with Matt Mahan.
Thank you for the question. I do think that strong independent oversight that's empowered to create accountability is really important. One of the themes in my campaign across the board is transparency and accountability. And obviously that should apply to our police department like any other function of government. I have been a big supporter of the independent police auditor and expanding her powers. I'm not sure about expanding or duplicating multiple offices or functions that are providing that oversight role. So I think strengthening the independent police auditor is where I would start, but I'm certainly open to understanding if that feels insufficient and there are other powers that would be needed. I would be open to that conversation, obviously. In terms of community engagement, I think it's critically important when we say community oversight. I think we do have to figure out how many different bosses our police department will have. And so I think we have to sort out who has what authority.
Yeah, thank you. I have been in support of the expanded oversight of our independent police auditor's office since I've been in office. And in fact, we've seen some of that expansion happen, and we brought that in front of our voters. I would, and am currently one of the authors on the memo with the mayor that was initiated last year, to continue to look at expansion of the powers of our independent police auditor, and then specifically when it comes to independent investigations. I do believe that that is an area where we need to improve, and an area that's crucial if we plan on continuing to build trust within the public. Anytime all investigations are handled internally, and even as we have today with just independent auditing oversight, I believe we don't have the full trust of our community, and we shouldn't be afraid. I know I'm not, as an officer that wears the badge, not afraid of having somebody independently out there that is able to look at and investigate police misconduct and complaints against police.
Thank you for the question. You know, at the county level, we had to respond to this after the murder of Michael Tyree in the jails in 2015. And out of that, we had a Blue Ribbon Commission, and that Blue Ribbon Commission was made up of community members, advocates, our public safety and justice folks, elected officials, and community leaders from across the county. And we came up with two independent approaches. One was the office, I'm going to always get the acronyms wrong, the Office of Correction and Law Enforcement Monitoring. And that is an independent office that acts like the independent police auditor that the board can give police powers to. And the other is a community monitoring committee that is all filled with community members. So I like the approach we took. I'd want to understand what is being proposed a little more, because I do think that having that kind of oversight just builds trust in the community, but we did it with everybody in the community, including our officers.
Thank you all. Now we're going to go to Brian from Showing Up for Racial Justice, Surge, to ask some more questions.
And these questions will have 90 seconds for response, so it's a little bit longer. First question I have here is in 2021, a report by the city auditor showed police officers are abusing their overtime compensation by engaging in more officer-initiated, low-priority and discretionary tasks, such as pedestrian and traffic stops, as well as report writing. This behavior has increased overtime costs by approximately 300% in the past decade. The audit further showed that officers are banking overtime hours into comp time to store up until retirement, at which point they can be cashed out for 1.5 times the salary rate that the officer was earning before. This has created a liability of an extra $21 million for the city for them to pay out when officers retire. This behavior was first highlighted in a report in 2016, but nothing has changed at this time. As a mayor, what would you do to deter this waste of public money? And we'll go ahead and start with Raul Perales.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with the second part of that question, but I disagree with the first. And I can speak from personal experience in actually having to work some of that overtime as an officer. And I can tell you it is not in the interest, at least the majority of officers, to want to stay and work overtime. The 10-hour shifts that are conducted are quite long enough. And I have been there on many occasions where I had to stay over and do report writing afterwards because the shift was so busy and you have 2 or 3 reports at the end of the shift and you're stuck. And I can guarantee you that's not something that I wanted to do, but it is a reality currently of having a severely understaffed police department. We had over 1,400 officers 12 years ago when I was full-time on the force, and today we are just back up to 1,150. The reality is and in 2016 was one of our lowest points, and the reality is that we are going to continue to need to demand on officers overtime until we can more adequately staff the department. The second portion of that is true. And I don't think that we need to solve the first part if we want to be able to eliminate the overtime use. But officers have an opportunity to either take some overtime for pay at the end of the year, or today be able to carry that over as a payout on retirement. That is something that can be negotiated in contract agreements to limit the number of hours that you can actually, comp time hours you can hold on to. And I'm more than happy to negotiate that so that way we aren't facing big payouts at the end of somebody's retirement.
Thank you. Cindy, we'll go ahead and go to you next.
Great, thank you. And I do want to just concur with what Councilmember Perales just said. And let me just add 2 more points to that. Obviously, one is that we need to make sure that we're negotiating at the table in a way that's fair, both for the officers and for the community. I do think, however, that until we get more officers, that much of the overtime that people have is mandatory. And one of the opportunities I think we have is to look at public safety officers and new methods of policing so that we're not putting so much pressure on one piece of the public safety and justice system. And what that means is that, for example, if we can do more to make sure that there are alternatives for officers in terms of, for example, having mental health workers meet them at a location, be able to take over that case so that they can go back out for calls for service. I think we're going to be able to address another issue, which the community is really concerned about, which is how long it takes an officer to be able to respond. And at times our resources are so strained that we do have 911 calls that take an awful long time to get an officer to be able to respond to. So I look that we both need to be able to negotiate, but we also need to be able to hire the best and the brightest so that we have enough people to be able to respond to those very serious calls for service.
Thank you. And last, we'll go to you, Matt.
Thank you. And my colleagues have already outlined that most of the overtime demand is really being driven by priorities that we have put on our department's plate and then not adequately staffed them to fulfill. So I think that the solution to better managing our public safety resources, in my mind, falls into really 3 categories, some of which my colleagues here have already covered. So one is just proper staffing. We have to attract and retain the best and most diverse pool of talent for the department that we possibly can. Today, we have just 11 officers per 10,000 residents, which is a fraction, frankly, of what most large cities have, and even small neighboring cities have today, often double that number. So staffing is part of the solution. Differentiating our emergency response, as we've been discussing, community service officers, partnering with the county to engage with trained clinicians and other responders. And then finally, using technology to streamline and kind of reduce the time that we're spending on things that are less essential. Paperwork is important, it has to be done, but I think that we can reduce the number of hours spent on those secondary tasks by embracing technology. I'll also just add that a viable plan to ending street homelessness in our community would free up significant emergency response resources as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Go on to the next question here. Do you think that the mayor's gang prevention task force has been effective? Why or why not? And what is your plan for the task force if you are elected? And we'll go ahead and start with Cindy Chavez.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I've served on the Mayor's Gang Task Force for years, actually. And here are 2 recommendations I would make. One is, I think we have to have a much deeper, meaningful conversation with the public about what it is we most want to address. And if what we most want to address is youth crime, I think that's a discussion we have with the community in a different way. And we bring the community across, from across our city to participate. The other thing I would recommend is that it's been the Mayor's Gang Task Force, which means that it's the mayor of San Jose. And I would suggest that we bring in any city that wants to partner with us to reduce youth violence and create more opportunities for youth. And the reason I think that's so important is, young people don't stay in one pod. I mean, I think what we're learning is that young people are connecting online and they're, getting in an Uber and Lyft and meeting each other all over the place. I think what that means is that we need to be flexible in terms of the way we respond. And the last thing I would say is I think we need to have a lot more professionals that are used to dealing with young people, both from a mental health perspective and a public health perspective. We do that now with many of the members around the table, but I think that could be added, that more leaders in that field could be added.
Thank you. Next, we'll go ahead and go to you, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say the effort has been tremendous. The results have probably been mixed. You know, I have one of the city's gang hotspots in my district, and we spend a lot of time there. In fact, given some of the challenges in the neighborhood, I've dedicated a single staff member who's part-time, but their sole focus is working in the neighborhood. And what I've noticed is that some of the initiatives driven through the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force are still pretty top down and sort of staff heavy. And I think that while people are working incredibly hard, they're very well-intended programs, I would like to see more of a bottom-up community organizing model in which we better empower the community to solve problems and then provide resources. And so I'm thinking specifically about the Project Hope work. And again, that team does tremendous work, including in the Hoffman Viamonte neighborhood in my district. And yet what I find is that most of the initiative and the actions and the events are so driven by staff that the community is playing this sort of secondary role and doesn't feel the level of ownership that I think we could generate. And so I think really focusing on a stronger community organizing model that empowers community members to identify the problems they want to solve, identify potential solutions, and have resources to pursue those solutions would likely be a more sustainable and effective model in the long run.
Thank you. And last, we'll go ahead and go to you, Raul. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had the opportunity as well the last 7 years to sit on the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force. And first off, I'll say that over the years, the city's task force has been praised and used as a model to be replicated in other cities, not only throughout the state, but throughout the country. And we saw tremendous improvements, and we've learned a lot and iterated on how we can better serve our community, reduce gang violence, reduce youth violence. And I believe that, in fact, this, anything that's been around for as long as this task force has, much like our independent police auditor's office, is in need of some change and being able to look at how do we reimagine this body and where do we really want to focus. When Mayor Susan Hammer created it, this was a priority focus for the city. And in fact, today, I would say, I think one of the measures of success is how gang violence is not as prevalent or as high of a crisis as it was 30 years ago. That's a positive thing. But now we can take the resources here in the task force, and I think that the best resource is really the collaboration cross-sector, cross-government agencies, including nonprofit and private and faith-based organizations, and use that, the fact that we can collaborate well here to figure out what the next iteration of the task force should be.
Thank you for those responses. I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Kiana for another question.
Before we get into the extra
ahead.
questions, we're just going to take a moment real quick. Matt King wanted to just give everyone an update.
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. So to answer a couple of questions in the chat, forgive us for not mentioning this up front. We initially invited the 3 candidates who are with us tonight and also Deb Davis. I'd be happy to explain that offline if anybody wants to contact me. Deb Davis accepted our invite, and then just very recently, her campaign let us know that she would not be attending. So that is why she is not here right now. Trying to get the best view for you all. It's a little complicated with our number of panelists. You know, one of our core values is community leadership and community participation. So we're going to continue working on that. It's a little challenging because we can't tell what you can see. So I'm trying to follow along. I've seen fewer questions in the Q&A. So we're doing the best we can on that. And so I'm going to pass it back to tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Matt, for the update. And I'm actually going to ask the next two questions or 4 questions. So this first one is a yes or no. We'll start with Matt. Do you support the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yes.
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 Great, thank you. In the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of reckoning about concepts like structural and institutional racism. Can you name an example of how institutional racism plays out in services in the city, for Matt Mahan and Raul Perales, or through the county, Cindy Chavez, and how do you propose to fix that situation? You have 60 seconds. We're going to start with Raul Perales.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'll use 2 examples. And the first one really is in regards to the services that we have in the city, and just the model of how we inequitably serve our community, whether it's pavement maintenance, whether it's street lights, or the deployment of personnel, things for street sweeping, parking enforcement, police enforcement. And we have divided up our city, and this was done through specific redlining mechanisms. And we need to identify that, number one, and we need to address those inequities and serve our community in a way that is cognizant of that. Secondly, and a smaller example, but one that I brought up at our rules committee today, policies that we have. And one policy that I fought today to undo was the ban on cruising, the prohibition on cruising. A policy based specifically on discrimination and racism, and I'm happy to have gotten support today at the Rules Committee to reverse that.
So we'll go to Cindy next, 60 seconds.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the question. A couple of observations I would make. One, at the county, even though we have invested quite a lot in our health department, in all of the health services that we're providing, one of the areas that we've obviously missed the boat on was really being able to provide the high level of services that were needed by the African American community. So we did a health assessment with the community of what the needs were. We invested in Roots Clinic as a way to remedy that. And in addition to that, under the leadership of Supervisor Ellenberg, we have invested a significant amount of money in Black maternal health so that we could do a better job of having better outcomes for moms and babies in the African American community. Another area that we're working on is that we know that we have more families that have children of color taken away from them. And so we're working with those families before they get into trouble. And we are, for example, contracting with the African American Community Services Agency to be able to offer services to families before they need to have a child taken away.
Thank you. As you look across the city, as Councilor Perales was referencing, you see the difference. You can experience very directly. It's not hard to notice the difference in park quality, availability of parking, road conditions. As a former public school teacher, the availability of after-school programming. And the reason that I have been so focused on metrics is that I think we need to move away from, which I think Councilor Perales was referencing, such a strong reliance on a complaint-based model in which the communities that are better organized, better engaged, have better access to technology, have fewer language barriers, get the most service. And I really think we need to be using objective outcome measures to evaluate our effectiveness so that we at City Hall are held accountable for delivering the core services that everyone relies on and needs to realize their full potential. And I think that needs to be a data-driven endeavor if we're going to really fix it.
Thank you. So in our final question for the community safety and racial equity, each candidate can now follow up or respond to something that was said by any candidate. You'll have 60 seconds. We're going to start with Cindy Chavez.
Oh, well, thank you. I think I would just add to something that Councilmember Perales said. The Mayor's Gang Task Force has had a lot of success, and I do want to acknowledge that. I think, Raul, you were absolutely right about that. And I think it gives us an opportunity to really have a jumping off point to dive deeper on the prevention side of violence in our community, especially as it relates to young people. So I missed that opportunity, and having seen the evolution of it and really thinking about Mayor Hammer's vision. And by the way, Mayor Hammer was kind of driven to that decision by people acting in community together. And I remember because I was a young, brand new policy aide and got a chance to volunteer when it very first started.
Sorry, I forgot I was next. The thing that I like, I agree, by the way, that the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force has had some great successes and has been nationally recognized. And while I offered some opportunities for improvement, I think that that's important to note. So I completely agree there. The thing I wanted to add is just that I think one of the things that's frustrating in these conversations is just how siloed different agencies and levels of government can be. And I think one of the most important innovations we need in government in the years ahead is breaking down those silos, because we have these different areas of responsibility, of funding, different roles that the county, the school district, the city play. And we often look at an issue, and I think that the temptation is to jump in and do something, which often means duplicating. And that's not helpful either. And so I think using technology and data to sort of bring greater transparency to what each area of government is doing and ensure that we're better leveraging and partnering is just an important thing that we haven't talked a ton about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I have bridged both sides of this debate, from growing up here in San Jose, being a young Chicano male and becoming a police officer, teaching in juvenile hall, and now my role on the council. And so it's been an issue of true passion for me. And in fact, a lot of the efforts that we're talking about, even starting back to the Office of Immigrant Affairs, the Office of Racial Equity, the Reimagining Policing and Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, the Charter Review Commission, each one of those, I was the author in the impetus of starting those efforts, because I saw the importance of the need to bring in the community on these very, very important topics, and a need for change, quite frankly. And so I've appreciated the process, the input that we've had. We had a robust discussion we had a robust discussion yesterday on all these recommendations. And I look forward to continue to working with organizations like you all to make them come to light.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes this section. Now we have a series of questions about immigrant rights that will be asked by Cara Rivera from Pasos. I'm going to pass it on to Cara now.
Thank you, Tamara. More than a third of San Jose residents were born in another country, yet our city government is inaccessible to people who don't speak or read English. Agendas are not translated, meetings often don't offer interpretation. Even the website for the Office of Immigrant Affairs and the Welcoming San Jose Plan are only available in English. This is a two-part question. First, what are your ideas to make our city government friendlier to people who don't speak English? And each of you will have 60 seconds to answer. We'll start with Matt. Thank
you. And I apologize for the background noise. My neighbor is suddenly playing music. Hope you all can dance along. So it's a great question. I think one of the most important things we can do is hire a workforce that truly reflects the diversity of our city. That's something that I've prioritized in my office. And I think it's important that we are transparently publishing all of our hiring data so people can understand exactly what our workforce looks like and how it compares to the city. I think that's really important. And then, of course, I often talk about data and technology. There's still a lot of services that are either predominantly or exclusively in English and hard to access in other languages. And I think that's a major investment that we ought to be prioritizing as a city. those are the two kind of lowest hanging fruit that jump to mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll go on to Perales.
Yeah, thank you. I've actually co-signed a couple memos during the budget process to try and address this very problem of the lack of resources that we have investing in translating our materials, as you say, digital, website, printed materials, and having live translation available at council meetings, which we don't have at all of our meetings today. It's on an as needed basis. And the biggest challenge really is cost. And this is something that we need to make a decision at the council on how accessible and open do we want to be to such a diverse community that we know we already have. And Councilmember Mahan was mentioning it earlier, but our current city service is where a call for service kind of model, where if you know how to access the service, you speak the language, you read English, you are going to have a leg up, 2 legs up at getting a better response. And that is something that is not fair. It's not equitable. And this language access is a key component to that.
Thank you.
Yes, Gata, thank you for the question. You know, at the county, we've really been struggling with this also. And I'll just talk a little bit about what we did. In 2018, we created a language policy. And that language policy is slowly working through all of the different programs at the county for us to make sure that we're doing a much better job in translation and making multiple languages available. And we do have that at our hospital. We both have people who speak multiple languages, but we also have a phone that you can call, which is not ideal, but at least for people who need specific information, especially about medical health, they have access to that. That said, you know, at the county, one of the things that we've started to do is have people available to translate, but we're not consistently addressing this issue, and we need to. One thing that became clear to me during COVID-19 is that part of the reason we have had such success in vaccinating people is because we've done everything in language, testing, vaccination, telling people how to get the services. So now we know how to do it. We just have to implement it.
Thank you all. And now for the second part of this question, it's going to be a yes or no question. Will you commit to funding full-time staff interpreters and translators to ensure agendas, staff reports, and other documents are available at least in Spanish and Vietnamese, and that high-quality interpretation is always available in these languages? And we'll begin with Perales.
Yes.
And Cindy?
Yes.
Yes, in fact, one of my staff members has been providing translation at council meetings sometimes. Yes.
Thank you all. For the following question, you'll have 60 seconds to answer. And it is, how will you support residents who are threatened by ICE? And we'll begin with Cindy Chavez.
So what we do right now is we fund many agencies to provide rapid response work. In fact, Sacred Heart is one of them. And I know we will continue to do that. In addition to that, we've also funded a number of law firms that are community law firms to help with DACA and other kinds of services to help people get through the citizenship process. And we've continued that funding. And frankly, we've had to because the rules keep changing depending on who's in power. So we'll continue to do that. And then the last thing we did is we started the Office of Immigrant Relations at the county in order to be able to give much more information to the community about how to access services that will benefit them. And by the way, both with ICE, but other legal issues that come up because of it. So that's an area that we'll continue to fund. I think the county will.
Thank you, Cindy. Next is Matt.
Yeah, I appreciate and support all the work that the county especially has done in this area. I think at the level of the city, we also have a role to play, probably starting most importantly with not having our law enforcement function be an extension of immigration in enforcement, essentially. So that I think is critical, and I'm happy there is maybe an exception to that I support, but I'm sure we'll get to that. I think legal resources we're finding, I mean, we know clearly around keeping people housed, for example, that access to legal resources is important. That's something we've recently funded as a council. So I think continuing to make those investments, making sure that we are supporting our community members and ensuring that they stay here in our community is important.
Thank you. And then we'll pass it on to Perales.
Yeah, thank you. My father immigrated to this country without documentation, as well as what would be considered a dreamer today, as a 12-year-old youth coming with his family. And I was a young child, about 2 years old, when there was a concern that my father could be deported before he had a legal status here. And it's been a personal issue for me ever since one of the first memos that I authored was to initiate the Office of Immigrant Affairs here in the city, where at times I would actually agree it could be considered redundancy, as Councilman Mejia was saying, because the county already had an office. But in fact, we were not working well in collaboration because we didn't have a key point person at the city. And so creating that here at the city actually helped us to not be redundant, but to work better together. Lastly, I'll say, and specifically as a former police officer, I think it's extremely important that we continue our policies and practices to not act as a function of ICE within our police department, not ask people their immigration status, to ensure that our community here trusts our police department.
Thank you all. I have one last question. It is a yes or no question. Do you support expanding voting rights for non-citizens in municipal elections? We'll begin with Matt.
No, not at this time.
Perales
Yes.
and Cindy.
No.
Thank you all. I'll pass it on to Tamara now.
Thank you, Cara. Yeah. Thank you, Natalia, for all your hard work. No, it's okay. We were actually just going to go into that, so it's okay. Yeah, thank you, Natalia, and thank you, Lisa, for taking on. So this is an example of making sure that our public events are accessible to the community. And sometimes we have to be patient and with these technicalities. So I thank everyone for your patience while we switch interpreters.
Yes, and a little patience. I'm sorry, I don't see our second interpreter's name is not coming up when I. Lisa, if you are here, chat.
Lisa Botha?
Is she in the audience?
I do see, yeah, attendees.
Okay, great. I will promote her and then I will make her the interpreter. Ah, there she is. Okay. Okay, in theory, we are good to go again, and we may need to pause to make sure it is working for folks, but I think we're good.
Okay. So thank you, Cara, for the immigrant rights questions. Each candidate will now have a time to follow up or respond to something that was said by another candidate. You will each have 60 seconds. We will start with Raul Perales.
Yeah, thank you. I think nothing in response or contradiction to my opponents here. Just an opportunity, I think, to sort of expand on this issue. As I mentioned, it's a very personal issue to me, and specifically one of the hot topics today is on the expansion of voting rights and of non-citizens. And I have stood out uniquely. If Councilmember Davis was here too, she was in opposition of that as well. In fact, in opposition of even having a study session to discuss it further. And I feel that much like my father, who was a legal permanent resident for 40 years here, paid his taxes, but was unable to vote. He could even donate, believe it or not, to candidates, but could not vote for them. there are, I think, some tremendously valid reasons as to why we need to expand these voting rights. And I look forward to that discussion when it comes to the council.
Tamara, do you want us just to jump in?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay,
Cindy, you're
I don't mind. I apologize. I was just waiting for you to direct us. You know, I think what this question reflects is how broken our immigration system is. And, you know, I have been a community organizer for many, many years. And one of the first projects I had an opportunity to work on was really addressing our immigration system, which remains broken. And I think that even, you know, as a mayor, that we have a bully pulpit to be able to lift up the people in our community and really demand that kind of equity. And it's part of the reason that as a county supervisor, and not just me, but this was, I think, a unanimous vote from our board initially, was to invest in supporting dreamers and others who were caught in the system and who needed just a little bit of support to get through it. And I do just want to add that, you know, I think that this is an opportunity for us really to, frankly, we only have a little more time with Biden. We need to jump in.
Excuse me. I'll also pick up on the same topic, and I did vote to extend the conversation, study the issue, and allow the, you know, encourage the community to participate in a robust discussion about non-citizen voting. I've sat down with dozens and dozens of residents who have a variety of opinions on the issue, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and continuing to learn and hear from folks. One of the things that has made me not support the initiative is the incredible number of immigrants to our country who have told me that they don't want to see the aspirational ideal of citizenship changed. The definition that many of us hold of electing, choosing our representatives. And so I think that the primary focus I want to have is on expanding pathways to citizenship, encouraging people, advocating to Congress, and fixing both our immigration and naturalization process, not changing the definition.
Thank you all. We will now have a series of questions about housing and unhoused residents that will be asked by Elizabeth, a member of SHOC, and Deborah Townley, a member of SOS. Elizabeth?
Thank you. We have ample evidence that requiring minimal amounts of affordable housing in new market rate development is not preventing displacement of working families and low-income residents. This has a bigger impact on Black, Latinx, Indigenous residents, and other people of color who face constant pressure to leave their communities. This is a two-part question. First, yes or no? Do you support a local neighborhood preference for new affordable housing? And we'll start with you, Cindy Chavez.
I don't know how that would be done, but I would be interested in exploring it.
Okay.
Did you say yes or no?
Yes, it's yes or
sorry.
no. Sorry. So would you say yes or no?
I'd have to explore it. I don't have a yes or no on that. I don't know how you could do it, is the question I have.
Matt Mahan?
Very much open to a pilot.
Okay, again, yes or no?
Sorry, I think the nuance is important. I'm a yes, maybe, need to figure out how to do it. I agree with the supervisor.
Okay, Raul Perales?
Yes, and we're exploring that now.
Thank you. Second, how can we prioritize keeping Black, Latinx, Indigenous residents in San Jose, many of whom have called San Jose their home for generations? You'll have 60 seconds to respond to this question, and we'll begin with Matt Mahan.
It's a big question for 60 seconds. I think the legal resources to keep people housed, bridging people with funding, gap funding to make sure that they stay housed when there's a loss of income is important. At one end of the spectrum, though, there's a lag of 20 years for it to really pay off, is improving the quality of our public education and all of the supportive services and support for our young people to ensure that they have access to and the ability to compete for high paying jobs in our region. And then at the other end of the spectrum, policies that significantly increase the supply of housing in our region so there is less pressure on prices and pressure on the market that is displacing people, because we've added 6 jobs for every 1 home we've built over the last 15 years, which is the real driver of rising costs and displacement. So there's a lot more to unpack there, but those are the areas I would focus on.
Yeah, this is another personal issue to me. Lost a lot of my family and friends that are Latinx, Black, and that have had to move out of the San Jose area, whether it's to the Central Valley or just completely exit the area due to the lack of being able to find affordable housing and an inopportunity to be able to even purchase or own their own home, something that is not afforded many of our low income and minority families. And for me, that's why it has been a priority issue on building more affordable housing, combating the NIMBYism here in the community that the communities that want to fight back and not have affordable housing. I'm a product of affordable housing myself, having grown up in a rent control fourplex. I understand the benefit of what that means, and I will continue to be one of the strongest advocates as our next mayor.
So as many of you know, and many of you helped us pass Measure A, our housing bond, that $950 million creates opportunities for us to do, it has 50 million for first-time home buyer and another 100 million for vehicle miles traveled housing, meaning housing near jobs. And then it has money for extremely low and very low income housing. And so that's one way, is to actually build the housing that we need. The other is that under my leadership, we are developing a program for community development corporations so that our nonprofits can play a leadership role in helping keeping people from being displaced by starting to have their own money to be able to make purchases. And we're also investing in a land trust strategy. And then the other thing I would say is that really expanding our first-time homebuyer programs is going to be critical, and that's going to require us to work really closely with the community to do that body of work.
Thank you. Next question. Our city is about to fall painfully short on 2 goals for building affordable housing. The mayor proposed 10,000 new affordable homes by 2023, and the city submitted a plan to the state saying we need to build nearly 15,000 by this year. We haven't come close. Do you agree that these are the right goals? And how do you propose we build more affordable housing faster? You'll have 90 seconds to respond, and we'll begin with Raul Perales.
Yeah, I do think they're the right goals. We have the analysis that tells us what's the number of units that we need. But the other challenge is that how realistic are they? And when you look at our past, we have not hit these goals. And so I think we also need to be honest with our community. For me, again, I've been proud to prioritize development of affordable housing, making it a priority when market rate developers are coming into the area, making it a priority when affordable housing developers come in and you have community opposition. Through my tenure on the council, I've helped build over 1,600 units of affordable housing, including all the way down to permanent supportive housing, using the dollars as Supervisor Chavez helped garner through Measure A. We need to expand that success citywide, which unfortunately today is not the case. There are some, and in fact, many projects that never even make it up to the council for a vote because they're killed by community opposition or by a lack of political will. We need to ensure that we are not just building in particular areas of the city. We need affordable housing throughout our entire city. And additionally, we need it throughout our entire region. And I don't think any of my colleagues here would disagree. The city of San Jose is one of the better cities. In fact, no matter how poor even our numbers are, it's even worse when you look at neighboring cities throughout the county and throughout the Bay Area region. So we need to be a leader in that regard as well. Thank you.
Elizabeth, do you want me to go?
Yeah, you can go.
Okay, you can point. I I know it's a little hard, even though there's only three of us. Here's what a couple things that I would say. I think one is that it's one thing to be able to say what the need is. It's an entirely different thing to have a work plan that tells you where you can go. And so one thing that I would recommend is that when we set goals, that we also build out those work plans so we really know what we need to do to hit those goals. As an example, you know, I think that, I mean, we all know the planning department is dramatically understaffed, planning, building, and code enforcement. That whole institution needs to be supported. It needs to be built out. We need people who want to not just be there, but grow there and stay there, because as soon as we train good people, they leave. And so if we could build that department out, it would help us in so many ways meet all of these goals. So any of you who are listening who are planners or want to go work for the city, please look at their job board because it's available now. The second thing I would say is that we need to work really closely with all of our public entities. As an example, VTA, again, this is a body of work that I led on, has an affordability component to all of the building it's going to be doing. It has 200 acres of land that can be developed along transit routes. That could yield as many as 7,500 units. And I think about 35% of them would be affordable, and a subset of those are for very low income. And so again, that partnership, the county's playing the role as the bank. We got to work with cities to make sure they'll allow that building and get those built as quickly as possible.
So the city of San Jose has had a housing crisis work plan for the last 3+ years with 47 strategies, which I would argue is way too many. I think when you have 47, it's hard to call it strategic. We've implemented nearly half, and we're not having the impact that we want to have. And I think it's time to step back and look more holistically at what's going wrong in the housing market. A big part of it is actually government, that we have made it really difficult to build. I think Councilmember Perales pointed to that. And while he and I have some disagreements about where we should be building, I happen to think that we have got to force ourselves to build on smaller and taller footprints, building up in urban villages, which do exist across the city, but where we have transit infrastructure, so that adding more people doesn't mean more cars on the road and significantly worsening our water shortage. I think we have to build for the future. We have to be efficient, transit oriented, mixed use. And for that kind of development, we need to reduce permitting timelines, streamline environmental review, make it much, much easier to do the urban infill that we want. Today, we make it very expensive, very complicated, and we need dedicated sources of funding for affordable housing from the state level to pool our resources, not the way we do it today, which is we tax housing to build more affordable housing, which means we drive up the cost of housing and we get less of it. So we really need a dedicated revenue stream at the state level.
Thank you for your responses.
Hi. One challenge to building enough affordable housing is the lack of political will and the outsized power wielded by the often white owners of single-family homes, who often oppose low-income housing in their neighborhoods. This is a two-part question. One, how will you stand up to people who shout, "Not in my backyard," who try to prevent affordable housing in their neighborhood? Cindy?
Deborah, thank you for the question. First I would say that having been in office for many years, I have had the opportunity to lead on getting housing built. And I don't think I've ever, that I can recall ever not moved forward. Now, that said, Deborah, here's one thing I will say. We have got to work with communities, all of them. And I will tell you that I've had as fierce opposition, and I'm not kidding. I had low-income neighbors not want new high-income housing in their community. They thought it would displace them. I had somebody not want I'm not kidding you, a wrecking yard across the street that they hated, but they didn't want affordable housing in it. And so part of it is that we've got to take the time to really engage neighbors, help them see the vision, and work closely with them to get them excited about it. For the most part, most of what I brought forward wasn't controversial by the time we worked with the community.
Thank you. Let's see, next, Matt, please.
Yes, thank you for the question. When I took office, a number of different entities, including VTA, approached me and said, well, we have this thought for an affordable housing development, but the last council member wasn't so supportive and we wanted to wait to see who got elected. And so in all of those cases, I can think of 4 specific sites in District 10, which is South San Jose, pretty bad traffic, a lot of high home ownership, sort of classically what people would think of as an area that would be opposed to housing. I said, yes, we need to do it. And part of what helped for me was that they were transit oriented. They were within walking distance to transit solutions, because I really do think that we have to deal with traffic congestion and climate issues. I also advocated for and have moved forward a transitional housing site for our unhoused residents, and had a number of community meetings with residents very angry at me. I think we have to be able to articulate why we're doing something and do the community engagement to get it done.
Thank you. Raul?
Yeah, well, the political will really is what's needed. You have to be able to stand up in front of and with the community and be able to engage and take that pressure that comes, and you have to be educated enough on the actual truths. You have to be educated on the solutions themselves, and be able to combat some of the rhetoric and the false narratives that are out there. I have had people threaten me that it would be the blood on my hands when their daughter gets murdered and raped by a future resident of a permanent supportive housing development that we approved and built in downtown San Jose. So I've had some of the worst of the not in my backyard sentiment. And I've been able to move forward with each and every one of those projects. And you don't always get 100% community support, but I have been extremely successful in maintaining that political will, and I will continue that as mayor.
Thank you. The second part of this question is, if transportation is one obstacle to building affordable housing in some neighborhoods, how can we be creative and create more public transit in those neighborhoods rather than using it as an excuse not to build? Matt?
Thanks for the question. Yes, I, prior to running for office, helped organize an advocacy campaign to save the last bus route in Almaden. I've been transit dependent for much of my life, but went about 15 years without owning a car in other cities in our country, and am a big believer in transit. I also think it has to be high frequency, fast, and efficient. And right now, our system is spending a lot of money on a very expensive light rail system that on many routes is significantly underperforming. We're paying over $20 per passenger trip. We could pretty much put people in an Uber. I have argued that we should take some of that public right of way, maybe one track, one area that we can experiment with, and open it up to more efficient solutions and allow both public and private sector entrepreneurs to compete, to move more people more flexibly, more efficiently, and dedicate that right of way to mass transit, but have more cost-effective and frequent solutions that people will actually use.
Thank you. Raul?
Yeah, thank you. This absolutely is utilized as a crutch. And I will give credit to Councilmember Mahan because he is correct. His predecessor utilized this often in regards to not even giving an opportunity for certain affordable housing projects. And I would say we need to be cognizant of where we are building affordable housing. And we need to ensure that if we have to make investments on public transportation, that we're partnering better with VTA, because at times as those cuts are made, as Councilor Mahan stated, like that final bus route into District 10, it does make it that much harder. I think the other thing we have to realize though, is that not all of our residents that are going to be living in affordable housing are going to need public transportation. A lot of them are driving vehicles themselves. And so we can't simply use that as a crutch, and we need to ensure that we are better dispersing affordable housing throughout the entire city.
Thank you. Cindy?
Yeah, thank you. I think Raul's right. I don't think everybody that's in affordable housing is transit dependent. And actually, one of the biggest complaints we get from neighbors is more cars. So, it's kind of half dozen, I forgot the expression, but The thing I would say that we also have to think about is whether or not we have micro mobility options. And I think we have to stop thinking about transit only as light rail or only as bus rapid transit, but looking more at emerging products. And LA has one that's fascinating. It's a really small truck, and it's a bus. It's very small, and it really circles neighborhoods and then gets them to the next big line, and it does it rapidly. And it's before COVID, it was one of the most significant increases in transit use was those little buses, because they went and got people to where they needed to go.
Thank you. The county recently adopted Laura's Law, and Governor Newsom has proposed a care court plan. Excuse me. Both of these measures force treatment upon people deemed unable to make decisions for themselves due to addiction or severe mental illness. This is a two-part question. Do you support these initiatives? How do you balance a person's right to make healthcare decisions for themselves with preventing further harm people may do to themselves or others? Raul?
Yeah, I absolutely support both of these initiatives. Working as an officer for 8 years and then now being on the council, I have specifically seen what the alternative is. We have been allowing people to deteriorate and then ultimately die on our streets, people that are suffering and in need of help. And these are individuals that are not going to be in a state of mind where they can voluntarily ask for that help. We have some that can, but we have many, many that cannot, and they fall into a category where we need to be able to do more. And that does mean initially against their will, to get them into a state of mind where then they can be more cognizant of the support and the care that they need and voluntarily opt into additional treatment, additional housing, and additional support. But until then, we absolutely need to be able to have more tools. And I'm looking forward to the success that we can have through assisted outpatient treatment or Laura's Law at the county and the governor's proposal for care court.
Thank you. Cindy?
Yes, I support the AOT, and one of the things I'll just share with all of you is that I was slower to come to this because I did have concerns about people's civil rights. But one of the things that really moved me was the number of parents who were asking for support to support their young adult children who were of a legal age to make their own decision, but really didn't have the capacity to do that. We'll see. We're going to learn how it's working in our community, and would love to come back and have a conversation with you about that. As it relates to care court, care court, and this is one of my concerns about AOT, neither of them are panaceas for everybody. Care court is focused very much on folks who have psychosis, and it won't force treatment on people. It will force them to be cared for, but you can't force treatment. So it still requires a level of engagement.
Thank you. Matt?
Yes, I'm very supportive. In fact, one of the first times I met Raul was at a press conference where we both spoke in support of Laura's Law. I've had personal experience with a best friend with severe bipolar disorder, a cousin who ended up on the streets of San Jose due to addiction. I know from personal experience and from talking to many other families with personal experience that simply waiting for someone to voluntarily decide they want help doesn't always work. And we do need to be able to intervene. In many cases, it's family members who intervene to get people into a stable environment where they have the option of accessing care. I'm not for forced medication. I think we've learned a lot since the days of institutionalization. And I think there has to be proper oversight and accountability, and you have to protect the rights of individuals. But we also have far too many people in our community who are not able to care for themselves, who we are leaving to die without the support and care that they ought to have.
Thank you. Okay, this is a series of 3 yes or no questions. We'll start with Matt. Do you support sanctioned encampments?
Yes, experimenting with one first to see how it goes.
Raul?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
The next question is, do you support the right to legal counsel for anyone facing evictions? We'll start with Raul.
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
And the last question is, do you support safe use sites for people dealing with addiction or other harm reduction services? Cindy.
It depends. And I would need more information about how that's set up.
Matt
Yeah, I'm unsure.
and Raul.
I also would need more information on those.
Thank you. Back to you, Tamara.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Deborah, for facilitating the housing questions. Now, each candidate will have 1 minute to follow up or respond to something that was said by any candidate. We'll start with Matt Mahan, 60 seconds.
Thanks. Gosh, I forget that we're going to have this section. I don't have any rebuttals. I appreciate my colleagues' comments. I thought made sense. I mean, I suppose on housing, which is maybe an area where we do have some, I think, productive disagreement. To me, it's really a serious. It's a math problem that has huge human consequences, and the fact that our region has added 6 jobs for every 1 home we've built is at the heart of the problem. And so my bias is, while I'm very supportive of public subsidies and having those public revenue streams to build affordable housing, I also think it's not going to get us where we need to be to balance supply and demand. So I'm also very supportive of streamlining our permitting processes and reducing barriers, including fees, to building the housing we need to better balance jobs and housing in our region, because I think it's going to help the most people.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I see the lack of affordable housing and our homelessness crisis as the #1 priority and crisis that we are dealing with. And because of that, I am looking for every tool that we can utilize to be able to address it. I'm proud to be the only candidate that's expressed support, for instance, for SB 9 and utilizing an opportunity to lightly densify affordable housing throughout the city, housing like what I grew up in. Opportunities like COPA, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. I helped to strengthen our rent control and tenant protection policies. And I'm proud now to have the sole endorsement of South Bay YIMBY, the Yes in My Backyard organizations, because of how I have been able to prioritize affordable housing and combat, quite frankly, as I described earlier, that NIMBY attitude of individuals that want to continue to combat what I feel is the most tremendous need that we have in our community.
Thank you for the question or the opportunity. What I would just reflect on what we're accomplishing relative to affordable housing and where we still need to go. There's no one action we could take that's going to make housing magically appear. We need to build housing at every affordability level as quickly as we can. We need to build interim housing. And I think Raul's point around sanctioned encampments is a good one. And we need to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. Sacred Heart led during COVID what was really a grand experiment. And what we learned is that for about $5,000 a family, we could keep 95% of the people in their home for over a year. That is a fraction of what we will spend on any other part of this solution. But it's going to take all of it to get everybody across the finish line. We need all the tools.
Thank you all. That concludes our section on housing. And we actually have one more question. What makes you a better option than the other candidates to be our next mayor of San Jose? So each candidate will have 30 seconds. We'll start with Raul Perales.
30 seconds, that's tough. I would say, and I've been saying this, I think that what differentiates me is what differentiates all of us really from one another, and that's our personal and our professional perspectives that we're able to bring to the table. And I have a very unique personal perspective, as I've shared tonight, but also professional, having served my entire career in public service, serving our community here. And additionally, I have the support of 4 of our council colleagues today, just exemplifying how I have been successful as a leader and will continue to be as mayor.
Cindy?
Oh, thank you. First of all, I do want to just acknowledge that everybody running has, you know, a unique set of gifts to bring. I'm running for mayor of San Jose because I believe that my track record of bringing people together to address very difficult problems is exactly what San Jose needs right now. And getting the city of San Jose and the county of Santa Clara to work even more closely together is an opportunity for us to solve a lot of problems.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thanks. I have a vision and track record and a plan, frankly, for getting to the outcomes that we need. And I think that in government, we often spend a lot of time describing the problem and not iterating quickly and creatively enough through solutions and being willing to drop the things that aren't working. And I think what we need in government today is greater focus, measurement, and accountability for results, which I think is a part of the culture change that we need and that I can help bring.
All right, thank you all. That concludes Sacred Heart's mayoral candidate forum for the primary election, June 7th, 2020. And a reminder to all of our participants, ballots have arrived or will arrive this week, and election day is June 7th. So please be sure to continue to educate yourselves and vote and register to vote. The deadline is May 23rd. Thank you again to all of our participants, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the interpreters. I'm sorry, I know I talk fast. Thanks all. Have a good night.
Everybody, good evening.
Thank you.